So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay on the newly released 0.97 patch. And today we have one of my favourite kinds of battles, because it's going to be a battle from one of the RP series that's going on, and it's going to be between Cardolan, and they are going to be facing a pretty terrifying invasion force on their borders indeed, because it's going to be a mix of Elven and Dwarven attackers. So will the Age of Men rise? Can Cardolan bring its dawning, or will the Elves and Dwarves still prove their superiority? We shall see. We shall go through, I think, the blue team first of all, considering they are the Elves and the Dwarves. And Elves and Dwarves, regardless of which armies are involved, would be a pretty nasty combination to have to deal with. But I feel as though Linden and Erebor actually make up for one another's deficiencies very nicely as well. Linden obviously with those Elven archers and their extremely powerful hybrid units, and then obviously the Dwarves with their armour and their heavy infantry really making up for what Linden lack. And we can see over here that we're going to be watching this battle from Enkspitz's perspective, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. Linden I always felt were probably one of the stronger factions in 0.96.1. They were very well rounded, which I think means mechanically they'll probably have one of the fewest amounts of changes in 0.97. They do have a little bit more in terms of their visuals, though. You can see that their helmets have been made a little bit more high definition now. There are going to be some differences between how they are now and how they were in 0.96, of course, but I do feel as though they aren't going to be the sweeping changes that they are in several other factions. And of course they didn't really need to be, because Linden were very strong, but in the best kind of way, where it felt like they were strong because of their faction synergizing its units with one another quite nicely, whereas, you know, obviously the wrong way would be to just have a couple of units which are grossly overpowered, but that wasn't the case for Linden. And we shall see how well they can do here against Cardolan. They've got some 4 Linden archers here on the front line with their new armour upgrade, as well as another unit just in behind them. Very, very basic as far as an arch unit for the Elves goes. Obviously, just like most of the other Linden forces, their light armour is going to be their main weakness. But of course, they do somewhat make up for that by having the additional damage and accuracy that Elven archers are known for. Just in behind, we can see that there are the Linden Guard, the slightly more expensive foot archers that the Elves have available to them. And obviously the main selling point behind this unit is the fact that it has not only a shield value, but they also wield a spear in melee, so they are pretty good against cavalry. So they have a bit more of a defense against archers and a bit more of a defense against cavalry. Obviously you do pay a little bit extra for that, but even so, potentially a good investment here, especially seeing as they're going to have to be the ones to take the aggressive stance and put themselves in harm's way. We also have some 4 Linden Marines back here. Of course, Linden very, very well known for their javelins. Javelins are capable of doing a lot of damage very, very quickly, of course. And Linden have the widest selection of javelins among all of the Elven factions, and the 4 Linden Marines are the most basic of those. Although, once again, another example of Linden's hybrid nature with the fact that they are spearmen in melee. So again, not only good at zoning out cavalry from a distance, but also in melee. And of course, capable of dealing a pretty hefty amount of damage to infantry as well. And he's gone for several units of them. Just in behind, we have another type of unit, I should say, that Linden are very well known for, and that is, of course, their pikemen. So we've got some 4 Linden pikes here. They are hiding currently. However, obviously, with Linden, you know, the pikes are very, very important for keeping their front line together, although they also have a pretty horrendous weakness to archers, of course, like most of Linden's faction, but it's definitely exacerbated for the pikemen because they don't have a shield, of course. But even so, it's going to be interesting to see how Cardolan decide to deal with them, because if it does come down to a slog in melee, Cardolan have got cheap pikes of their own, but they're not on the same level as the 4 Linden pikemen, so they would lose that fight. So we shall see. Just in behind them, we have another unit that I really like from Linden as well, mechanically, the Linden Infantry, a very, very nice and efficient line infantry unit, of course. Again, the lack of armour is their downside, but they do have a shield, which means, you know, arrow fire can be mitigated as long as it's coming from the front. And in melee, like most Elven units, they have that extra defensive skill. Just all around, their stats are going to be nice and high for the cost, which means if you can get them into melee, especially alongside their pikemen, Linden's front line is very difficult to break down outside of using those range units, of course. And then over here we have another unit that is very strong for Linden. The unit of Rangers, of course, the Warden's Velocitarian. Elven Rangers in particular are very damaging because they have slightly higher damage overall than the equivalent human Rangers, outside of those that are on General's Bodyguard tier, of which I think there are only 2 in the game, to be fair. But the Elven, you know, missile damage is going to be higher, which of course means Cardolan are going to have to be very, very careful, especially seeing as Cardolan do have some more lightly armoured elements to their army, because the Warden's Velocitarian will absolutely shred them if they are allowed to. Excuse me. We have the other Linden Javelin unit over here as well, the Mithlon Marines, which, unlike the 4 Linden Marines, they make for good line infantry units in melee, so they will pull out a sword, which means they will be better at tackling infantry in melee than the 4 Linden Marines, but obviously they lose the utility of being good against cavalry. Got some more Midland Marines over there, several banks of them, Harland infantry. Interesting spread that Engsfith has got going on here. He's definitely spread his army out a lot, some 4 Linden pikemen, and then at the back, I believe, yes, this is just 2 units of the Noldorin Guard. It's worth saying that the Noldorin Blade Masters, and I believe actually maybe the Knights have it as well. I know the Noldorin Blade Masters do, though. They have this unit model now as well, which I'm a big fan of because I really like this unit model. Obviously, again, this means that very few units in Linden's roster have got good armour. The Noldorin Guard are one such unit. They may not be multiple HP, but they are still very, very good. And as long as they get into melee, there's really very little in the Cardolan roster which will give them too much pause. So it'll be interesting to see how Cardolan decide to deal with them. Now, moving on to the first of the Dwarven armies, we have over here Rules 1, who's going to be playing as the first Erebor army. Good to see Rules again. He's got a ballista on the front, which I would assume, considering the scale of the terrain that they're going to have to go up, particularly on this side of the map, on this side of the road that is splitting through this forest. I would imagine that this is more of a sort of countermeasure to any defensive artillery that there may be, because of course a well-placed catapult or trebuchet at the top of the hill could be devastating as the blue team continues to move forward, so it's a good choice to bring a ballista. This is an RP battle, so this would have been done in advance as well. It's not like you could have picked on the army selection screen, so even so, that's a good bit of foresight. Here we've got the Ironfoot Spear, so Dwarven Spears, you know, the main difference between Dwarves and Elves, of course, is that Dwarves favour a bit more heavy duty, a bit more armour than the Elves, which of course has its place. It does mean that they're going to be far more resilient to skirmishers than their Elven allies in this battle, but of course Cardolan do have access to crossbows, so the Dwarves will most certainly not have it all their own way with regards to a ranged fight. However, while Cardolan may have crossbows, they have nothing quite on the level of the Blacklock Engineers, one of the most devastating units in the game. If you get them into ideal conditions, they're arguably the most damaging. I know that the Witchers are capable of dishing out an awful lot of damage themselves, but they have very few volleys in them, whereas the Blacklock Engineers have considerably more. But we'll see. I mean, it is going to be a difficult ask to get the Blacklock Engineers into an ideal position. They'll probably just have to make do and do what damage they can. And of course the Ironfoot crossbows, which as far as crossbows go, are also very, very nice. Got some Ironfoot axe throwers back here. Axe throwers, of course, as I have mentioned in the past, have lost their AP in 0.97, but they have gained a bunch of base damage, which means they are going to be better against more lightly armoured targets. And Cardolan have their share of lightly armoured units, which the Ironfoot axe throwers can go after. And to be honest with you, even against units that have decent armour, as long as the axe throwers get into a good position to throw their projectiles from, they will still do a lot of damage. It's more to just differentiate them from javelins in a way. So more base damage but no AP, so interesting trade in there. We also have the Erebor Legionaries, who have their new unit model here, which brings them more into line with the rest of the Erebor army, because they had massive noses in the last patch, which made them look very strange. But now they look like more elite versions of the units which precede them, which of course are the Ironfoot Warriors just in the background there, so it's kind of an ideal comparison here. Erebor Legionaries, of course, the stronger unit of line infantry that Erebor can field, and you know what you're going to get from a unit of Dwarven infantry that you have to spend a decent amount of money on. Very, very nice indeed, and of course they have those Dwarven axes as well, the sort of diamond-shaped axes that the Dwarves are known for. And back here we have the Ironfoot Warriors as well. And finally, Rules' General's Bodyguard unit is the Highborns of Erebor. The Highborns of Erebor now, I think, unless this was changed very late in development, are now the strongest unit of, well, the most resilient unit of sword and board infantry that Erebor has available to them. The Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin are AP, I believe, whereas the Highborns of Erebor are not. So it's kind of like the same sort of relationship they have between them that the Mithril Guard and the Guards of Khazad-dûm have between them, albeit the Highborns of Erebor not quite up to the same level as the Guards of Khazad-dûm. But this is where the Erebor General is going to be, which you'll see how Erebor does. He's going to be advancing up the road to link up with Engsfith, and they're going to try and attack around there. They're going to try and avoid the terrain entirely, which is completely understandable, because that's a hideous hill to try and go up. Then we have Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud. I believe he's actually on my... Actually, that's a unit of miners from Rules there. I believe he's on my team for the Tug of War event. I believe we're both Dorwinian. So we'll see how he does with Erebor here. He's got a full front line of the Ironfoot Warriors. He's getting ready to much more aggressively push, considering this side of the map is a little bit more forgiving, and hopefully he can catch out one of the forces on the other side of the hill. We'll see if the Dwarves are quick enough, though. It's not exactly what they're known for. Natural sprinters, they're not, unfortunately. We have the Ironfoot crossbows back here, very nice support as well. It's going to be interesting to see how the crossbows really slug at one another from both sides of the battlefield today. Ironfoot halberds is an interesting choice as well, going for them instead of, well, actually he's gone for both them and the pike, so he's gone for both phalanx units, the armour piercing but shorter range, and then the longer range as well, so potentially very good, but lack of shields maybe could become a bit of a problem. We shall see. He's definitely gone for more in the way of infantry, it would seem. The Blackbook Engineers are here also. Something else for Cardolan to worry about. Some Highborns of Erebor just in behind, and then of course more Erebor Legionaries. And then finally, the final Linden army, in addition to some Dwarven miners from Eclipse. We have Sin of the Dark Cloud. So he has got some 4 Linden archers as well, in addition to some Harlinden infantry. The Mythlon Marines with all their shields in formation, a resplendent sight indeed. The Mythlon Swordmasters, of course, the heavy swordsmen for Linden. Not heavy in the way of armour though, like most Linden units, but in melee, very, very nice. Very high skill and very high base damage, as most swordsmen will have. And we do get to see them, the Noldorin Blade Masters, so this is their new look. I have to say I really like this look. I like the slender long sword that they now have, and I really like the armour as well, because obviously the Noldorin Guard always look great, so just to see more of this unit model I think is a good thing. Multiple HP, terrific heavy swordsmen. They could very well be the best in the game still, but of course that's something that we can look at in greater detail another time. Interesting map though, he's over here near this farm. And now let's have a look at Cardolan. Cardolan I've always looked at as being the plucky underdogs of all the western kingdoms of men. They bear a lot in common with them, but their lower morale does mean you tend to root for them a little bit more so. Not that they need it though, they've got more than enough tools at their disposal to do a good job regardless. And of course we have all of their new unit models to look at once again today as well. So Arsal Ali is over here, he's a little bit isolated, he's going to need to run to the support of his allies, otherwise he's going to get overwhelmed by the Linden and Erebor forces on the other side of this big hill. He has got some Greenway Garrison footmen as well as the Minhariath spearmen, and I believe some men-at-arms in there as well, just in behind indeed. So pretty classic frontline this for Cardolan, cheap pikes and then backing them up with some solid mid-tier spears and melee infantry. However, it is going to be tough for them to get much cost efficiency off against Elven and Dwarven infantry. Certainly this is just going to be a case of holding the line with these units and then trying to do the damage elsewhere. Primarily with a unit like this. Obviously Cardolan's crossbows are one of the things which is most well known about the faction. Very, very nice to have, of course. Minhariath sharpshooters are also AP in melee when they pull out those maces, so a very nice multi-purpose unit here, potentially very useful against the dwarves in particular. And of course the slightly higher tier crossbows, the Menotar Romen Guardians, which are halberdiers in melee. So again, AP in melee, albeit in a different way. And of course, very nice with their crossbows as well. Dunedain Captains are a pretty good choice as well, much like the Noldorin Blade Masters on the other side. They too are a bodyguard tier heavy swordsman, multiple HP. They don't have the armour upgrade here, but still they are a very strong unit. While they may not be quite as good as the Noldorin Blade Masters, especially not without their armour upgrade, they are still very capable of going toe to toe with the Elven units that are across the way. Also, Tharbad Warhammers, they will be much better employed against the dwarves because of their heavy AP focus, but a really, really strong unit of bodyguard shock infantry with those big warhammers of theirs, very heavy on the AP. And then just in behind we also have some Thieves of Tharbad, which they have a projectile now, so it'll be interesting to see how they use those, but are also much more focused around skill and damage dealing in melee. Their light armour, however, will put them at the mercy of units like axe throwers and archers. And then just in behind some Gwathlo tracks as well. The Ghetto Rangers themselves are back. They don't have quite the same level of damage output as Rangers, nowhere near the same. But even so, they can hide anywhere, which is a fairly useful tool, although I think, considering the fact that Cardolan are likely going to be bottled up on their hill, it's going to be quite difficult, I think, for them to utilise their hide anywhere ability. We have FFA Muffins, who is playing as the middle of the two Cardolan armies. He's got some Wardens of Tirn Gorthad over here, some Greenway Garrison spearmen, some footmen, so again, combination of pikes. These Dunedain Captains do have their armour upgrade. You can see here that they have, it is technically the full plate, they just have a tabard on now, and so, you know, the Cardolan forces are made a little bit more distinct from the Arthedain Dunedain. Over here we have a unit just out in front to try and cover the retreat of his ally, I assume, but it's only a single unit of Minhariath sharpshooters. Some Greenway Garrison archers, the militia tier archers, which are out here near the signal tower, or watchtower I should say. More sharpshooters, more archers, so again, big focus on the crossbows and the archers here, which is unsurprising considering the battlefield, but it's going to be tough here for Cardolan, for them to really try and hold back the horde of elves and dwarves that are before them. Very, very nasty force they have. Minhariath sharpshooters once again on the front line from Von Mountain. Also some Greenway Garrison footmen, some more Wardens of Tirn Gorthad. He has punted for the Trebuchet, which could be very good as long as he manages to avoid contact with that Erebor Ballista that Rules has brought. And some Hearthguard of Amon-Sul, a very nice morale buffing unit alongside the Wardens of Tirn Gorthad. Very important for Cardolan. They're going to need their morale to hold itself together, otherwise they're in real trouble here. But without further ado, let us begin. And it is a very interesting map, this sort of two large hills, although this is likely going to be the one that is far more important in this battle, considering the other one is going to be surrendered by the Cardolan forces without a fight. This one, however, they are going to sort of put most of their forces on. The trebuchet immediately opening up fire, and it looks like it got a square hit there, right into the centre of those Ironfoot spears, so a very important start there. Crispy dwarves. And another very nice hit, this time into the Ironfoot crossbows. Trebuchets have been made a little bit more accurate, I believe, which is good, because trebuchets were so inaccurate in the past that in a situation like this, you know, you rather counterintuitively you had to wait until the enemy was somewhat closer so you could reliably hit them, which was kind of strange. But now, you know, they're still going to be the least accurate of the three main artillery pieces, but you actually stand a good chance of actually hitting stuff now. And this is, of course, going to mean that Rules is going to have to get a move on here, because he is getting bombarded. Those last two hits weren't quite as telling as the first two. However, good initial volleys here from Von Mountain's trebuchet. Meanwhile, you can see over here the Ironfoot crossbows. You can see also the Dwarven miners getting forward, but I feel as that, yeah, you can see the Arsal shuffling his way across very, very easily. And this is going to mean that they're going to have a whole other army defending this area over here, and that is going to make it quite difficult, actually, for both Eclipse and Sin to move forward, because it's even worse over here, you would argue, because you can't get up some of these really steep inclines, so you can do some sort of natural choke pointing, as it were. However, over here, they're not going to have quite the same luxury. It's much more wide open over here, and considering the fact that already the Greenway Garrison archers have been revealed, you can see that Von Mountain is trying to form up a sort of makeshift men-at-arms, makeshift front line with his Minharieth men-at-arms. I think actually it's about time we already turn the speed down, considering it is a relatively short battle. That's how you know that there's going to be a lot of wanton aggression very quickly in this fight. But I feel as though Von Mountain is at a bit of a disadvantage here. He might want to try and get his trebuchet away, but certainly he is being engaged by the Linden front line, and a combination of 4 Linden pikemen and Linden infantry is going to be far too much for a thin line of Minharieth men-at-arms to deal with. They are a pretty good line infantry unit, honestly, but also one of the main problems behind Cardolan, as you will often hear people say, is their morale. And there are no morale buffing units nearby, I don't think, at least not close enough. Yeah, there aren't. And that's going to be a problem, because these Minharieth men-at-arms are almost certainly going to rout in the face of this Elven assault. Especially if they're going to take some shots in the back from their own archers. Although it's very worthwhile to try and shoot these pikemen while you can. Definitely the kryptonite to the Linden pikes are going to be archers, although that is true with most pikes. You can see here the bandits. The bandits have been reintroduced to Cardolan, and they now have javelins. So they effectively act as a sort of lower tier javelin unit for Cardolan, which is a pretty nice tool for them to have, but they're immediately, you know, they're just out here in no man's land basically, and they're immediately being focused down by the full might of Engsvitz's archer corps. And Von Mountain is now trying to charge forward to reinforce, but honestly I think it's already too late. You can see that the Linden forces are already starting to find gaps around the edge of the Cardolan front line. Some Cardolan pikes are heading down the hill. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul are moving forward, but their presence is needed far closer to the front line to try and prevent these units from routing. And to be fair, they may have already actually entered that effectiveness, because they do have a rather wide radius where that works. And they are still shaken, but I can't help but feel as though, you know, they would already be wavering if not for the Hearthguard. Now you can see the Linden forces getting their own javelins in. The bandits have got nothing on the Linden professional javelins, and that's going to be a real problem for units like the Greenway Garrison footmen. Fire arrows and javelins coming in, so Linden know what they're going to do. They're going to try and break Cardolan, which is a fairly simple tactic to follow. As long as you can do damage quickly, and as long as you can keep yourself, as long as you can prevent them from really organising themselves, you can do that. And already, considering the fact that over on this side of the road, Linden have managed to get some Linden infantry in behind the enemy lines, there's already some very large problems that Cardolan are going to have to deal with. You could argue even that Von Mountain maybe could do with a little bit of support from his allies, because he didn't have his full army over here. He only had half of his army over here. If he had his entire army, he probably would be able to hold back Linden for a decent amount of time. He still would be in serious trouble as soon as Erebor came forward, to be honest, but with his full army, he would have been doing much better. And to be fair, these Minharieth men-at-arms, they are sort of wrapping around the edge of this line here, but I feel as though the Linden infantry will hold on for long enough, and with the pikes at the centre, Cardolan are going to take far too much in the way of casualties for this to really be worth it. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul are coming in here to try and lock down this side as well. Meanwhile, just a horde of Erebor dwarves, and you can see that Linden are also swinging out wide to try and come in and negate this terrain as much as they possibly can, as the Minhariath sharpshooters continue to spray down the dwarves of Erebor as they move forward. And there is a decent amount of dead dwarves over here. Certainly the terrain is playing into Cardolan's hands quite heavily, as you would expect. But Cardolan really do need to do a lot of damage to these armies on this side, because I do feel as though they are already fighting a losing battle on the other. But over here at least things have started off how they would want it to. Arsal, however, is going to come under assault again by a two-pronged assault from both Erebor and Linden, much like Von Mountain is on the other side relatively soon, you would think. Again, there's going to be another full frontal volley, however, from all of these crossbows. Minhariath sharpshooters and the Minotaur Roman Guardians. Those are 3 units of crossbows primed and ready to shoot into the front, and these are all pikes and halberds as well. So prime targets as the bolts come in, and they may be in loose formation, but I mean the bolts at this point are scarcely going to miss because there are so many dwarves down here that it's going to hit something. And while you may not be able to focus down an individual unit as much as you would like, you're still going to be able to hit things. But still, Eclipse is going to be moving forward and attempting to do what he can there. What have we got going on over here? Some Greenway Garrison Spearmen are routing, as you might expect. Some Greenway Garrison Archers just in behind. Von Mountain has got his crossbows into position now, and you can see that the Linden forces, while they have been victorious, now that the crossbows and all of Cardolan's archers are in place, they are taking a bit of a beating. However, they also have the luxury of being able to call upon Erebor's reinforcements as they move forward. Look at all those fire arrows coming in. Fire arrows are definitely something you want to use sparingly, but against a faction like Cardolan, especially considering how they started out with none of their morale buffers on the front line, it was absolutely worth using them here. You can see here the Harland infantry defeat seems certain. They have managed to, they have unfortunately engaged a unit of pikes head-on, and the Greenway Garrison footmen managing to hold them at arm's length. The benefit of having a cheap pike unit there for all to see. Well, this trebuchet, is it going to get another hit? I wonder. I mean, technically yes, but only 1 Mythlon Marine and a very small amount of crossbows. The Erebor are getting ever closer to this front line, and that's going to be bad news for Von Mountain, as both Rules and Engsfitz decided to advance right up the road. Von Mountain has tried to park his army in the way, and he has had... It hasn't gone as badly for him as you might expect, to be fair, considering the relative strength that Linden and Erebor can call upon. But ultimately, I do still feel as though he is fighting a losing battle here. He does need to try and do as much damage as he can, which, to be fair, while he may have lost a good amount of his infantry, Cardolan were never going to win this based on strength at arms in melee. They were always going to have to try and win this with their ranged units. Interestingly enough, not a single unit of cavalry that I noticed on the field. It's possible that Sin had some Forlands and scouts hidden. Maybe Cardolan even have some units hidden in the trees. This is a very heavily forested map, but I didn't notice any cavalry, which does mean that, you know, it's not as if Cardolan are going to be able to rely on any sort of lancer action either. Cardolan can call upon some very damaging lancers indeed. Meanwhile, this is going to be the ultimate litmus test of Arsal's front line. But this flank is going to be in big trouble, I think, because the full might of the Linden army is going to crash down upon it. Sin of the Dark Cloud rushing forth very, very quickly. I think actually it's a good time to go up to 1 speed. The Gwathlo trackers are going to scurry away, and they should manage to do that. They're pretty fast. However, Thieves of Tharbad Warhammers. The Tharbad Warhammers are in the wrong place, definitely. Some Minhariath Men-at-Arms over here. The Tharbad Warhammers should have been tailored to go up against the Dwarves rather than the Elves. Not that they'll do badly, but it's all a question of efficiency here. And Cardolan can't afford to be too inefficient, otherwise they're just not going to be able to rack up the kills they need in order to be victorious. Mythlon Swordmasters and Harland Infantry, without any pikes over here, these heavy elven swordsmen are really going to be taking names against the basic Minhariath Men-at-Arms. Meanwhile, still sort of trying to bank up against the dwarves over here. You can see that FFA Muffins is now reshifting some of his units. I think maybe he's splitting his army up into 2, and he's going to try and support his allies. But you can see here Sin doing exactly the right thing, going into the side of this line with his Mythlon Swordmasters. We'll see how long they're able to hold up for. Gwathlo Tracker's still shooting. Some bandits heading over. FFA Muffins doing his best over here. Does FFA Muffins have some of his units over here? He does, so he has split up his army into 2 halves basically, and he's moving to support. However, I can't help but feel as though this probably should have been done slightly earlier if Cardolan were going to go this route with it. Because as it is, Von Mountain looks as though ever more so he's in full retreat. There's Nolder and Guard heading forward as well, primed to take on the Greenway Garrison Archers in melee, which is certainly not good news for them. There's only one way that fight's going to turn out. And Greenway Garrison Spearmen, the brave militia, trying to stop the advance of the elves. It's worth saying as well that now Rules is coming on site as well with his Dwarven infantry, so even though FFA Muffins may have brought some reinforcements over here, I don't think it's going to be enough. There's some civilians over here as well, fighting for their home. Shovels and pitchforks. Warns of Tyr and Gorthad shuffling their way into position again. There's a very real case for saying they should have been committed earlier just to make sure that the morale didn't collapse for Cardolan. And here we can see the Mercenary Guildsmen, which were hidden, and you can see the big difference to the Mercenary Guildsmen in .97. They wield maces now, they're AP infantry. So it's another AP option that Cardolan do have, and it is a reason to bring the Merc Guildsmen, because in the past they were just a unit of line infantry. Most factions that had them could just have another unit of line infantry that had better morale for the same cost, or similar cost. Meanwhile, here we can see the Tharbad Warhammers have broken ranks and charged into the Ironfoot Warriors, and that's not a bad choice. Ironfoot Warriors already shaken. Of the two Dwarven factions, Erebor do have the slightly shakier morale and taking a full downhill charge from some of the mightiest hammer-wielding units in the game. Could be pretty bad for them, but I feel as though this was the area of the map that I had worries about. But to be fair, I mean, FFA Muffins has come over here with his Cardolan army, and it looks as though he sent most of his force over here, and he has managed to stop Sin's advance for the most part, although I feel as though Sin can still, at the very least, put up a fight long enough for the blue team to win on the other side, although we shall see. I often accuse people of not, you know, you don't want to underestimate Cardolan if you can help it. You can see. Erebor and Linden, after all, are two factions which are less focused on numbers than Cardolan, so even though they were outnumbered by an army, maybe the sheer manpower of Cardolan will be enough. The Tharbad Warhammer's trying to pull back now that the halberds are arriving on scene, but again, another vicious volley from the crossbows. And of course, it is worth mentioning, seeing as Cardolan's hopes and dreams rest on what is essentially their ranged units, it is quite difficult to keep track of that during a live replay. And they are doing a lot of damage over here, it must be said, especially to the Dwarven player. Like, those crossbows are savagely biting into Eclipse 2500's Dwarven army. You can see now that Cardolan also trying to counter-attack into Sin's army as well. He's also got some bandits back here that he's managed to intercept. Mythlon Marines are stronger than them, however. So things are actually going okay for Cardolan over here now. We'll see if, you know, they can keep this going. Their quality might let them down in the end. But now, with Rules coming forward with some Dwarven infantry as well, although that was a very nasty volley right into the front of them. Javelins being thrown by the Linden Marines as they continue to push forward here. The Ballista attacking in there. The Hearthguard of Amon-Sul, the Minotaur Romen Guardians getting ready to shoot once more. There goes one of the Cardolan generals. That's obviously a bad thing. That's Von Mountain's general. You can see the Hearthguard of Amon-Sul there with their big purple kite shields. Around here somewhere, in and amongst the trees. These Greenway Garrison Archers doing their best to kill off some units, but front on against the Dwarves with their plate armour and their shields. A Militia Archer is unlikely to be able to do huge damage there. Warns of Alos Tyrion back here, pulling out their two short blades, going to town on some spears. There's some routing crossbows, so yeah, Von Mountain's army most certainly bearing the brunt of the fury of the Elven-Dwarven alliance. There's not much they're going to be able to do to stop them at this point. Once again, morale has proven to be an issue, but even if Cardolan had locked morale on all their units, I feel as though they'd have struggled on this side of the engagement. You know, purely because they just didn't have, you know, Von Mountain didn't have his entire army over here from the start, which he needed, I think. And also, FFA Muffins sent over more reinforcements to the other side, which could end up being a good decision, because they could have just said, well, this side's lost. We need to try and win on the other side, I think. And to be fair, I mean, the Dwarven army in particular is looking pretty ragged at the minute, and good to see that those Tharbad Warhammers are being put to good use against the Dwarves. A very, very good unit indeed to use against them. Arrows flying in to the Harland infantry as they try to move up the hill. Linden have rallied a little bit though. It's looking like, you know, Noldering Guard, 4 Linden Marines, they're going up against just Greenway Garrison Spears, which is not good for Cardolan. They're getting sandwiched a little bit as well, so FFA Muffins maybe getting caught out a little bit, chasing Linden a little bit too far, being drawn in. And now he's being picked apart a little bit. Minhadiath Sharpshooters shooting their bolts into one of the units of Noldering Guard. There's also the Noldorin Blade Masters in here as well, once again going up against Greenway Garrison Spearman. Real workhorses of the Cardolan army, although infantry as well, but you can't expect them to go into engagements like this and for them to withstand too much. You know, they're going up against, you know, arguably the best Elven Swordmaster unit in the game, as well as some of the best Elven infantry. There's Elven archers and javelins, there's Dwarven infantry on this front as well. It's a very big ask for them to win that, and you can see they're trying to get their rangers into a position where they can shoot along the line that was over here. Cardolan have now moved down the hill to engage what was left of the dwarves down here, but there's really nothing that will deal damage too quickly now that the crossbows are running out of ammunition. And I think they're pretty much all gone on this side, Cardolan. Yeah, you can see that Rules and Engsvit's moving forth through the trees. Still a few Minhadiath Sharpshooters over here. The Cardolan Trebuchet crew facing off against some Ironfoot crossbows that shuffled their way over here. Wardens of Elos Tyrion are back here as well, going up against the Menatard Romen Guardians, but the hilltop is now being contested by the attackers, and the defenders are now going to find themselves engaged on all sides. And Sin and Eclipse will be able to hold on at the very least until their reinforcements arrive, and then the tables will be turned. Cardolan will be fighting uphill. Gwathlo trackers, some of them pulling out their hatchets. There's still one unit that has a little bit of ammunition, trying to shoot down the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Arrows planting themselves in the dirt all around these fighting men. They're marching forward as well. And to be fair, I feel as though Cardolan, I feel as though not engaging soon enough, or not committing, we'll go through it on the army, on the results screen I think, but suffice it to say, I feel as though Cardolan, they should have either been more bold and sent all of their units out to these outer defences sooner, or they should have just built their entire defence around the hill, which would have been risky to be fair, because you're bottling yourselves up and you're leaving yourselves open to javelins, crossbows, a ballista, and archers of all descriptions. So I can see why they didn't do that, but I feel as though that being the case, they should have tried to maybe be a little bit more bold. But now you can see some routing Menatard Romen Guardians. It takes quite a lot to rout them, to be fair. One of the better units in the Cardolan roster, but this is going to be pretty grim. Noldorin Guard from Engsvit's arriving, relieving the beleaguered force. That's Rules 1's miners, but this is mostly Eclipse's army, and Eclipse has definitely taken the most in the way of losses from all of the attacking forces here. To be fair to Cardolan, they have made the attackers work for this. I feel as though it's just a case of early organisation, which maybe cost them the chance of contesting this battle a little more so, because in particular the crossbows, they were savage when they got going. When they found their targets and their marks on both sides, they did manage to do a lot of damage, but it ultimately wasn't enough. It is a tough task though. Erebor and Linden are two factions which do complement one another very nicely, especially when it comes down to a pure infantry engagement like this. There's no cavalry on the field, which still surprises me. No, Cardolan in particular have got some access to some really nasty lancers. Erebor have got access to their chariots. Linden have obviously got their knights, which, you know, a unit of the Linden knights would honestly be something which would rule this battlefield. It would be something Cardolan would find it very difficult to respond to outside of their crossbows, which would have been needed just to hold the infantry at bay. So yeah, some Gwathlo trackers being engaged in melee. There's a few Noldorin Guard over here, maybe biting off a little bit more than they can chew. There's still quite a lot of Gwathlo trackers left alive, although I can see them routing pretty quickly with those fire arrows. There's also the Highborns of Erebor right here. Very, very strong unit of heavy Dwarven infantry. Fire arrows still being used, of course. Very good choice, as I've said, against Cardolan. These Tharbad Warhammers, I'll be interested to see actually. Well, I won't be able to see because we'll be seeing this from the Linden perspective, but those Tharbad Warhammers must have racked up a decent kill count for themselves, because certainly Eclipse was fighting quite literally an uphill battle, but also figuratively. because those Starbad Warhammers are a very nice unit to use against Dwarven infantry, and they have, you know, they're still pretty healthy to be fair, and they've been fighting for quite a long time. I think our Sal's unit of Starbad Warhammers did die earlier on, but this unit is still going strong. Here come the Minotaur Rollmen Guardians, trying to finish off Sin's Noldorin Blade Masters, but if there's a unit you're not going to finish off quickly in melee, it's going to be the Noldorin Blade Masters. More Minhariah Spearmen running for the hills. Tons of men of Cardolan running for the map boundary. A warm sight. Meanwhile, some sharpshooters over here as well, they're on the verge of routing. In the face of only archers as well, although to be fair, the amount of losses their armies have taken at this point, you would probably think about routing as well. And there they go. And that's it. So a very nice victory for the elves and the dwarves. Men are in fact weak, and the age of men will not come to pass just yet. So there you can see obviously nice kills. Rules got fewer kills, but that's because he was lagging a little bit behind Engsfitz, and I feel as though Engs, maybe he would have waited if Von Mountain had deployed maybe a little bit further back, a little bit more defensively. But seeing an opportunity, seeing a lot of gaps in the line, he went for it, and that's absolutely what you should do. Eclipse obviously had a very rough time of it. He had the most men lost of his team, of course, over 1,650 men. But it was also a very difficult hill to try and go up. He had all of the crossbows trained on him, and obviously the dwarves. You're obviously going to go for the dwarves with crossbows. It's a very good choice. Sin went out wide and initially was having a lot of success. When Muffins arrived, he slowed down a little bit, but ultimately he was always going to get reinforcements from his allies from the other side of the battlefield. He may very well have won anyway. It'd be interesting to see if he would have, perhaps, but nonetheless, very well played from the attackers. They did what they needed to. They moved forward. They worked well in tandem. As for Cardolan, nothing overly wrong with what they did, really. I feel as though the only thing was a bit of early organisation. If they had, maybe Von Mountain, obviously, I think he either needed to defend that road with everything he had, with his morale buffers nearby, or he needed to just pull back to the trees a little bit more and try and use the terrain to his advantage, which maybe would have been a little bit better. What they couldn't have done, Cardolan, is just camp all three armies up on the hill, because they would have just been focused down by all the ranged units that Linden and Erebor had to offer. But it was still a good effort. They still got a decent amount of kills between all three of them. Considering those are Dwarven and Elven units that they got the kills on, and considering a lot of their front line was made up of very basic units, goes to show the strength of Cardolan's ranged power in particular. But let's have a look at what did the damage for Engsfitz. So the Wardens of Valos Tyrian, naturally the Rangers, 290 kills. Very, very nice. For Linden Plateman with 233. Again, that was on the front line, must have been one of the first units in. Noldorin Guard with 194, so nearly 200 kills on them. A few units breaking 100 kills, actually, including Harland and Guard, so that's nice. Obviously, Spears in melee. 196 on 4 Linden Marines as well, so a very nice split, actually, with pikes, infantry, elites, javelins, archers, rangers, all of that sort of evenly spreading the kills among themselves for Engsfitz. And then for Sin of the Dark Cloud, a whopping 393 on the Wardens of Valos Tyrian, so they must have got into a good position at some point in the fight to shoot along the Cardolan lines, and obviously when you do that with Rangers, you're going to watch the kill count soar. But it's good that interesting that you managed to do that on a more wide open map like this. It's easier to get that sort of kill count in a siege, certainly with Rangers, so very well played there. And then a lot of units breaking 100 as well. Mithlon Swordmasters, very, very well suited to fighting the Cardolan infantry. Melee, Harland infantry, same sort of deal, only less in the way of damage. And then the 4 Linden Marines, Noldorin Blade Masters also doing very well, Noldorin Guard. Cardolan have very little that can match up to the Noldorin units in melee, naturally. They're some of the best around, and Cardolan have their strengths elsewhere. But still, very well played to all. Big thank you to Engsfitz for sending this one in. It's part of the RP series, so Linden and Erebor joining forces to try and stop the Green Menace, which has grown. I've noticed that in the RP, Cardolan seems to have done quite well for itself, to say the least. But very well played. Nice to see some of the new units in action as well, some of the redesigns as well. We saw them very briefly, the Mercenary Guildsmen, but we got to see their maces, the Erebor redesigns, some of the Linden redesigns, and of course a lot of the Cardolan redesigns as well. So yeah, big thank you to Engsfitz. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.